Hello, this is Todd Miles of Food Trucks in Babylon. The recent revelations of Ravi Zacharias' behavior, they've really rocked the Christian world. People who had been helped by his teaching and preaching ministry have felt betrayed, wondering what to make of what he taught. His behavior has also raised the issue of spiritual abuse in the church. So we're glad to be able to bring this two-part podcast with Ken Garrett to you, which specifically deals with spiritual abuse in the church. And our prayer for this podcast is to raise awareness of the dangers of abusive pastoral care and offer hope to those who are hurting.
The survivor of an unhealthy church or Christian cult will never have is grace. There is no grace in an abusive church. There is not. It has a price tag. If it looks like grace, it has a price tag.
You're listening to Food Trucks in Babylon, a Western Seminary podcast. I'm Todd Miles. I'm here with Ryan Lister, and we are back again with pastor and author Ken Garrett to think with us about spiritual abuse in the church. Ken is pastor of Grace Church in downtown Portland, and he's author of the book In the House of Friends, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Abuse in Christian Churches. And we are continuing our conversation to try to encourage pastors to help those who have been hurt by abusive churches. We are back with Ken Garrett, pastor of Grace Church in Portland, Oregon, a downtown church, but not an urban church. I've heard you make that distinction before. We might dive into that one in a different episode. But significantly, for what we're talking about here, author of the book In the House of Friends, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Abuse in Christian Churches. We are glad to have you back, Ken.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I think in the previous episode, we started talking about spiritual abuse. If you could just give us just a brief recap of what that spiritual abuse is, and I want to follow up question with narcissism. So maybe just a quick recap of spiritual abuse.
You bet.
Especially in the church.
Spiritual abuse is when a member of an organization is recruited into it and begins to experience mistreatment and an emotional abuse through the delivery system of religion or spiritual truth.
That's good. That's helpful. Now, in the book, you tie this pretty tightly to narcissism. Mm-hmm. Could you define what narcissism is?
Sure. Narcissism is it's a condition. The official condition would be narcissistic personality disorder, and it's a condition in which a person develops basically an antisocial behavior that traffics and abuses those around him or her. And the person develops a supply system. It's called the narcissistic supply system of the people in his life that meet various needs, money, sex, adulation, church attendance, whatever, and begins to get those needs met, always receiving more from the members and from the narcissistic supply and giving nothing back. So it's an extraction of value from the members.
You mentioned in the book, as you were trying to evaluate what a narcissistic pastor is, that it's oftentimes exposed over time through their words. Can you help us see what kind of words we're looking for, especially in light of that sort of gaslighting principle that's floating around with narcissists too?
Yeah. Well, particularly when you're dealing with the church, military, I guess a lot of areas, the narcissist will have tremendous power in their communication skills. Probably not great writers as much as exquisite speakers, very powerful speakers. It's why rhetoric was taught to every Greek child, boy growing up. That's where leadership came from, the ability to speak in such a way that people's minds were changed. And so narcissists will, you'll usually find them with great oratorial abilities. Now the thing is, where else do you have a good place for narcissists to go but the churches
And a pulpit.
and the pulpit?
Yeah.
And so although they exist in great numbers, I think, in politics and probably in the military and all of that, the pulpit is just real low fruit for a person to go for if he can preach well.
Yeah. Other spaces, other things, sources of spiritual abuse besides sort of that narcissistic tendency, or are there other places that you would point us?
Well, I think there are a variety of personality disorders that result in the abuse of followers, and so certainly a borderline personality disorder can result in that. I mean, yeah, it's not just the narcissist. It's any of the antisocial type conditions that include the mistreatment of people.
In the earlier episode, you mentioned when you were struggling to leave the church that you were in because of abuse that was taking place, you didn't have categories to describe. You didn't even have a vocabulary to describe what exactly was going on. Yet, as you write in the book, it's not like the Bible's silent on the issue of abuse by leaders. You use David as an example of spiritual abuse. Ezekiel is full of divine condemnation of false shepherds. So help us think through what the Bible actually says about spiritual abuse.
Well, there's always an idea in there of a usurping of God's proper place, and the assurance of to the victim that you are right to do so. So the first spiritual abuser would be Satan in the garden.
In the garden.
He's
Okay.
speaking for God. He's bringing some new information to Eve, and he's extracting obedience from her that should only have belonged to God, of course. And in the case of David, he may not have been formally seen as a prophet when he spoke, but he's writing Psalms, and he is the anointed king of Israel, and he used that to extract a sexual relationship with a wife of a man's wife. So I'm probably drifting a little bit about that, but the Bible always has to do with a person using God-given gifts and skills for personal gratification and enrichment that should, in an obedient world and in an obedient life, should exclusively be offered as a sacrifice to God and God alone.
Yeah, it strikes me also that we're all, by divine design, vulnerable to some degree. That relationships require vulnerability. When shepherds, as they're described throughout the Old Testament, exploit that vulnerability for their own personal gain, it's supposed to be there for the good of the sheep, but they exploit that for their own personal gain. I'm struck as I read through the warning passage on this. There's very little that evokes the white-hot wrath of God as quickly or as sharply as someone using their mantle as a shepherd of God's people to serve their own needs and to actually harm or feed on the sheep that are there.
Yeah. There's I won't say no quarter given to these spiritual abusers in the Bible, because there are Christians who do become abusive, narcissists, horrible pastors, and their relationship with God is between them and God. I don't see much of it at all, but I trust God with that. But nonetheless, the most severe judgments that we find in the scriptures are for the misuse and abuse of people for whatever reason. But when you're in a position of spiritual authority and leadership in a church, to misuse that in any way, it seems like there's a special kind of displeasure that God has for that. It's certainly what the apostles in the writing, what Peter, John, Paul, Jude, what their parting words of Scripture in the Bible almost exclusively had to do with the presence of people in the early churches who were trafficking in the Church of Christ.
So there's plenty of Bible. It
yeah.
sounds like what you're saying here, and yet not much resource has been developed from that. Is that what I'm picking up from you?
No, it's what drove me. I'm glad it did, but it's what took me outside of the religious world of studies to understand this issue, because the way that I felt Christianity, with a couple of exceptions. Dale Enroth, who taught down at, I believe, at Westmont, and then the book, The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. Yeah. These are Christian-based books that are just timeless. They're so well done. But most of the time, the church addressed this issue in a devotional format. Pray more, read your Bible more, pastors fail to, or leave that church, rebuke your pastor, call a meeting or a committee or something. God feels your pain, don't worry, but don't call the police. Something like that. A very insulated, spiritualized approach to this issue, and I found it completely unsatisfying to help me understand the dynamic that I knew psychologically had happened to me. And that's what put me out into the world of more secular studies with contemporary writers about it that really put the pieces together for me. Mm-hmm.
So you've experienced this, and you've done a helpful job of evaluating these aspects. So once you recognize an abusive pastor, what do we do? Like, what do we do? What does a congregant do? What do the other pastors do?
If you are a fellow leader and you are self-differentiated enough to stand up to that leader, then you confront and do it with your bags packed. You are probably not going to win. A good narcissist, a true narcissist, builds a whole system of support that is well designed to handle people, even fellow leaders that would dare to bring up something. So communicate for conscience sake, but do it with your bags packed and take care of yourself and your family. And then if you're a member, in a word, leave. There's two sounds that a narcissistic pastor really freaks out about. One is the sound of people walking out the door on him. And the other is the sound of a police officer knocking at his door. Those are the two things that straighten him up real quick.
What's the responsibility of those abused by the pastor to keep him from abusing others?
There is none.
Right.
Yeah, okay. There is none. Although, as in the world of recovery from everything from, gambling to sex addictions to drugs to alcohol and to spiritual abuse, you will find these furnace-refined survivor in recovery that go on into advocacy work. And most of them now you find online. It's wild online. Their blogs are wild. It's just a crazy world out there, but you will find them advocating because of a desire to help and serve fellow victims. And I've been communicating with the International Cultic Studies Association, their president, who wrote the foreword to my book, about 3 areas of victim advocacy that I see taking place on the horizon today, that I'm experienced with all of them. The one comes from the professional world of Stanford University Studies and Robert Lifton and the International Cultic Studies Association. This is made up of therapists who deal with Christian, non-Christian, just all of these survivors, and they're formal counselors. The other world is the world of the pastor who sees the victim coming into the church and does what he or she can do to help these poor people, and usually doesn't know a lot of understanding of it, but does the best you can do. And then the other world is the world of the internet bloggers. They've been derisively called, I can't think of it now, discernment bloggers, and not in a good way. And they've exposed people and pastors and caused a lot of trouble for ministries. But they play quite a role in that they are the voice of victims who are not heard, not cared for, can't afford a counselor, and are angry and wanting to talk. And so they play that role, and each of those three areas has a distinct weakness that the others are aware of. It has strengths, and it also has weaknesses. And I'm working at forming a dialogue between members of those three sources so that we can appreciate each other and kind of get around a common banner of helping people out and maybe letting go of some suspicions we have of the other. Sure.
Do seminaries have any responsibility? I'm asking this for a friend.
Seminaries do, yeah. That's a common retort you'll find from people. They'll go, well, what's wrong with the seminaries that they let this guy out and do what he's doing? They have no responsibility in the sense that seminaries are a wonderful and gracious provision that provides a product for payment, right? And their job is to teach things about ministry.
Is it for payment?
I've never been paid.
Jeez, this is news.
Okay.
We need to talk to our boss about this.
Next question, please. No, I don't mean to put it that way. They are there to form character in the context of studying. But I don't expect any seminary to be able to catch a narcissist. These guys are so smart and so good. They'll be the people that you'll have speaking at the commencement. So I don't see that.
It's kind of you to say that. I would respond by saying that we do feel some responsibility, though.
Okay.
Even though I totally understand and respect and to a large part agree with what you're saying. We're really not in a position to do that. But that has been passed off by the church, I think, to the seminaries.
Yeah.
So we are trying, but it is difficult. It is difficult.
Right.
Ken, what does reconciliation look like for an abusive pastor toward the church he abused?
A pastor whose sin led him to abuse, should he repent of that, he will notify the church of his confession, his repentance, and his desire, should the church ever feel in its heart that it would like to pursue for reconciliation. You know, you can't pull a church by the ear and say, look, it's time to reconcile. You would say, I confess my sin. I have repented before God, and I would like for you to know that if there's ever a time when I can hear and understand what I have done to you in the cause of bringing about reconciliation, I would love that. But there really is no pressure, because I hurt you and I know I did. Yeah. So you have to. So, okay, that's the guy who knows he did wrong.
Right.
A narcissist will never come back to the church. No narcissist that I'm aware of has ever even finished a course of secular psychiatry and counseling They don't, and they don't seek counseling. They seek counseling when they are 45, have their first panic attack, or their son gets caught and thrown in jail, or some other crisis drives them to chest pains and problems, and it puts them into the hospital. And then a savvy doctor or nurse, somebody might catch on that there's really nothing physically going on here, and begin to discern the kind of person this is. But as soon as the immediate crisis is over, they're down the road. Narcissists do not seek help for their problem. They don't believe they have a problem. Yeah.
So should abusive pastors be allowed to lead churches again?
That all depends on who's doing the allowing. Okay? If an abusive pastor is in a denominational structure and they pass him off, as we've seen in different denominations do, shame on them, and absolutely not. Absolutely not. But particularly in America, we are full of independent, autonomous churches. So when you say, he should never be able to, do that again, there's no one to step in and stop him. As long as there's 10 or 20 people that'll sign a tithe check out to him and love his teaching and also feel so bad for how those other churches treated him, he's still in business. Yeah. They should never do it again, but unfortunately, because they're narcissists, they are going to do it again for sure.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll dig into how can healthier churches help those who have been abused.
Hey there, this is Andrew Pack, the Director of Online Learning for Western Seminary, where I also teach biblical theology and Christian spirituality. At Western's global campus, we desire to equip students around the world for gospel-centered transformation wherever Jesus has already sent them. Western offers fully online degree programs, along with a new class format called Online Live, which allows teachers and students to interact in real time. Check us out at westernseminary.edu. Now, back to the show.
Ken, this is Food Trucks in Babylon. We like to ask a question that comes from Babylon, this post-Christian world that we're in. And maybe a question that might come to people is something like this. I'm really not surprised there's abuse in the church. Ken, aren't most Christian church pastors abusive? I mean, don't they fleece the flock? Aren't they all driven by ego and desire for power?
That's understandable if you are pretty much looking at the big guys that are on television and flying around on their planes and all of that. But there are, last I saw when I was doing a wiki research, there are about 350,000 churches in America. So let's just do the math and say there's 350,000 people out there fleecing the flock. They should be making a lot of money, right? I mean, it should be like being a pastor means you are an incredibly wealthy, rich guy. Instead, what we see is that the majority of churches in America are less than 70 people. Their pastors work, I believe, half of them. Anyway, they work 2 jobs to be a pastor. They go to school for years to obtain an education that is not going to pay them the equivalent of a master's out in the marketplace or a doctorate out in the marketplace. And if you look at their tax forms, they are not making that. So I would think it's not obvious that the flock is being fleeced and that all of these pastors are this way. Most of them are hard-working people that were driven by ideologically wonderful ideas to spend their life helping people. But of course, there's some bad eggs in there.
Yeah, true enough.
Sure.
probably not the best advertisement for Western Seminary.
Oh, sorry.
Right there. Come to Western, spend 3 years earning a degree that will decrease your income potential. But unfortunately, that is the case. It is the case a lot of times.
Ken, why do you think the church or the broader community, Christian community, is drawn to the bad egg or to the narcissist? What's that pull? So you're saying you have all these guys who are giving their lives away to serve in many ways.
Yeah.
But then those who are trying to serve themselves, maybe that's a rough summary of narcissism there. Why is the world drawn towards that light?
Well, anthropologically, we are wired to follow other people. I like to think that in our unfallen state, we're wired to love and follow God. And there's something about us that is attracted by the wonderful, the miraculous, and the highly talented genius and all of that. So when you get close, when you have an opportunity to be close to a guy that can stand up behind a pulpit and make people feel things on a Sunday morning, that's special. And then when you have an opportunity to be closer to that person, it feels even more special. And in many churches, you're treated more special. So we're talking about the narcissist here. So narcissists are absolute geniuses at reading people. So they give every person that they seduce what that person most wants. It's like Needful Things in the Stephen King. It figures out the weakness. Maybe you always wanted to go into missions, but for some reason, you couldn't get through the board or whatever. You're not in missions. The narcissist figures that out and finds a way to lead you to believe that, through him, you're going to get back out there into missions. And it could be many things like that. So the attraction is that your weakness is suddenly known, revealed and read and known, and then somebody actually is saying, I can fix that. Yeah.
I'll solve it.
I'll get you in a pulpit, Ken. Yeah.
Now let's shift focus. As you do in the book, you move from describing what spiritual abuse is and profile of spiritual abusive churches and pastors to how do we help people? So first off, what's the likelihood that when a pastor looks out at all the people gathered on a Sunday morning, this is obviously in a pre-COVID world, or post-COVID world, but what are the likelihood that they're going to see somebody out there that is still bearing the marks of spiritual abuse?
Yeah. I would imagine each of us in this room knows people that have been spiritually abused. Of course, we've been talking about that, so you know that. So we all know it's out there. We all know a parent whose daughter went away to college and nice kid and Christian and everything, and suddenly ain't coming home for the holidays because she's going with her Bible study group to a special meeting, and these kinds of things. She's recruited into this unhealthy group. So how extensive is it? The last study that I saw, which was done a few years ago, put it at, I believe, between 2 and 3% of members in churches. I don't know what it is today, but it was 2 or 3%. So it's not the incidence or the level of incidence of sexual abuse and sexual assault with both men and women, but it's about there of people that have been through this kind of experience.
Very good. So in your book, you provide 7 signs of spiritually abusive churches. Which are the most important? I'm going to encourage people out there who are listening to get Ken's book, but you look at deception, loss, that is, the spiritually abusive churches will demand everything from people, isolation, elitism, fear, disclosure, and then trauma. I think are the 7 signs. Pick a couple and just explain why these are so devastating.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first one is really the thing that sets the whole tone for spiritual abuse, and it's deception. Lifton called it the milieu control. It's controlling the information that comes into a person's life. It might look today like the pre-approved list of pastors and theologians that you are encouraged to read, and the ones that we think have a low view of Scripture or whatever, But it's controlling the information that comes into a person's life, and then even being deceptive about what your ultimate real goals are for his or her life in joining your church. And it stays that way. Manipulation through the deception is a really, really biggie. Mm-hmm. The other one that strikes me as being important is a sense of loss. And the way I view that is the extraction of your time, your money, your relationship with your kids, your wife, your friends. It's an extraction of things that are valuable to you that are somehow given up for the abusive ministry without you getting anything back, really. Mm-hmm. It's a constant life of giving and expecting more. So I think that's a very important indicator. And then in its extreme forms, the fear of displeasing leaders is a very ominous condition in the church. And you can have wonderful, good churches. It doesn't mean they're cults or horrible places, but people have what is a horrible fear of displeasing leaders, and that needs to be dismantled. If you're afraid of displeasing a leader, you're not going to confess to that leader, and you're not going to. It's bad. So that fear of the displeasing the leader is an important thing, an important relational issue, and then finally trauma upon exit. If you expect that exiting your spiritually abusive church will result in you experiencing a loss of friends, loss of family, loss of money, job, finances, in some of the cults, your house was built by the church, and if you leave, you lose your house. In the cult I was in, routinely people's goods and belongings would be packed up in a box and left on the front porch for them to come and get. Mm. And you are cut off and you have lost everything. So that trauma on exit and the emotional experience after leaving that you don't want to have, because you've heard that people who leave are maybe going to hell. Mm-hmm. People who leave are defecting from God's, Demas, having loved this present world, has departed, and you are that now. So your self-image, and you don't want to experience that. So the trauma on exiting inflicted on those who do leave, and you see how they're treated, and somebody leaves, maybe they were under your church form of discipline or whatever, and they've left. And now you don't want your pastor to know that you're having a cup of coffee or a beer with the guy, because he's in trouble. Mm. That creates a spirit of fear in the church of what would happen to me if I left. Mm-hmm. So I think those are some important things for us to bear in mind.
So 7 signs. Mm-hmm. I believe you just gave us 4, which were really helpful to walk through. Of those 7 signs, do you need all of them to know I'm in an abusive church, or is there a sliding scale? How do you think through that?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. You don't need them all. Some churches don't have them all. That is just the 7 of the 8. I don't remember the one I left out, but 7 of the 8 ways that Lifton identified, and I kind of Christianized them to think through, how do those work in a Christian church? Yeah. So no, you don't need them all to say you're in an abusive church.
In response to that, would you say, if you flip those, if you turn those negatives into positives, so instead of deception, it's not being deceived, is that a mark of a healthy church? Would that be a helpful way to see what a healthy church is?
Yeah, in fact, I think I do kind of flip them in one chapter, and it's not so much that a healthy church is one that doesn't deceive you. It's that a healthy church is, in a healthy way, transparent and completely honest with you. Right. If they're running out of money, they say, folks, there is no pressure here. We believe in God. And we're going to tell you we've run out of money or we're running out. And in our church, there have been times, for how small we are, where we just have all this extra money. And we have...
Your current church.
Our current church.
That you're pastoring at the moment.
That I'm pastoring at the moment. Oh, yeah, not the cult church, yeah. And we have had to stop and make sure we're being totally honest with people. Hey, guess what? We got an extra $200,000 in our reserve fund here. They don't have $200,000 in their saving accounts. So you have to wrestle through. Am I really going to tell them that we're sitting on a $4 million piece of property here? I mean, and it's not much of a wrestling to be a healthy church. You're honest with people, and you're honest about who you are and what you do, and that way nobody can ever surprise you. So
That's good.
Churches are honest, good churches.
Yeah. One of the things that's connected is, I think, especially the thing you were just talking about with loss, like there's a totality, it demands all.
Yeah.
You talk about this idea of religious totalism. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. Religious totalism is an aberrant application of the understanding that to follow Christ is to give your life over to Christ. And the problem is I can't give my life over very well to anybody because of my sinful nature, the troubles I have every day. What I can do is offer my life to Christ and ask him to do what he will with it. An abusive church really hammers home an idea of what we would call religious totalism, where you were either all in or you might as well leave. So in religious totalism, say you've got a family birthday party coming up this Friday, and you say, hey, I'm not going to be at Bible study. It's my, my dad's birthday, and I'm going to be celebrating that. And then it's not just an idea of have a great time, tell him happy birthday for us. Oh, no, it's, well, did you want to follow Jesus or your dad?
Okay. Which pushes you into a guilt trip. Yeah. Wow, okay.
I love the chapter title of the point where your book really begins to turn to healthy churches. How do you help others? And the chapter's called "When the Walking Wounded Walk into Church." Yeah. Now, so I want to start thinking about how do we help those. Let me begin with this. You make the point throughout the book that many of the practices of an abusive church are things that every church does, and they're good things, right? You're studying the Bible, you're doing scripture memory, you're reading hymns. I mean, I think at one point you say something like, abusive churches sing hymns, so do healthy churches. Healthy churches study the Bible, abusive churches study the Bible. And but when someone who comes from an abusive situation walks into your church and they see you doing these good things, is like triggering? Is that the right word?
It's not so much triggering if it's good things that they liked about their church.
Okay.
The difficulty is, everyone who leaves this abusive church, let's just say at the abusive church there are 50 wrong things. I'm just throwing that out. 50 wrong things. Finally, one day this person realizes that they realize 5 of the 50. And they can't abide it anymore. I don't like the pastor. He's, not right or something. So they leave for those 5 things. Here's the deal. They walk into your church with 45 beliefs and things that they're holding still as being the marks of a true and a good church. You preach the King James Bible. Well, that's one good thing. We were looking for a church that preaches the King James Bible. You practice a real good, strong church discipline. We were looking for that because we know that that's what's involved. And you have a Wednesday prayer meeting? Okay, yeah, we were looking for that. And they can certainly be understood for this, that you walk into a healthy church carrying a lot of things that you don't even realize were wrong or at least not helpful to you. So to help that person who's coming into your church, it's all about appreciating and giving them a safe distance. They sit in the back. They sit in the darker parts of the sanctuary. and they don't want to be ambushed on their way out and invited to anything. They've been there, but they're there, and you honor them for being there. You don't recruit them, and you don't assume they're not Christians. You treat them with basic respect. The one theological truth that you as a healthy church will always have, and they as a survivor of an unhealthy church or Christian cult will never have, is grace. There is no grace in an abusive church. There is not. It has a price tag. If it looks like grace, it has a price tag, because grace is always dangerous. Grace holds people loosely. Grace turns around and says, "Are you going to leave too?" And I mean, that's grace. So when people come into your church from these backgrounds and they are self-medicating, they're yelling, maybe they're challenging you with your sermon and your theology, and they're walking out the door when you sing "I Surrender All." All understandable responses. Your grace is not to say, "Look, you need to be in church. You need to." The gracious thing is to say, "I understand. You're dealing with some heavy, heavy stuff. Let us be your landing pad." And we're just here for you, and glad you're here with us. Thanks for being here.
It strikes me that could be hard for a pastor, because you want your congregation to reach out and be hospitable and invite people to things, right? Because a lot of people are looking exactly for that, I think. So this survivor, as you're talking about, probably doesn't come with a "Hello, my name is Todd. I'm a survivor." So how do you recognize?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they sometimes they'll come to church and immediately tell you all the dirty deeds of the church they left.
Okay.
But
so it might be that easy in some cases.
Usually not.
Okay.
Most of the time you don't know. But if you train your congregation in the art of relating in a way that is comfortable and kind, and you have people at the doors and your greeters, or those kinds of people who have this quality of remembering names.
Okay.
Man, you are way on the road to kindness here, because when we went to our first church that we seriously joined after leaving, there was a lady that was a greeter at the door and handing out bulletins. And it was a Saturday evening church that met at a college, and she remembered my name, and she'd say, "Hi, Ken, how you doing?" And I would go in the darkest corner with Sharon and sit there, and but that is so winsome, because it means that if somebody remembers your name, it means they have expended brain cells for you that week. And so it sounds pretty rudimentary, but that's it. We don't need courses on spiritual abuse. We don't need Kingdom of the Cults classes or something. We just need people to be trained in operating under the graciousness of being a healthy church.
I think just listening, it's a lost art in many ways, but just listening to somebody, and not listening for ammunition, like maybe a narcissist would, something that they can use for their own purposes, but to really actually get to know somebody is really, really important at a pastoral level, but also at the congregational level, just one-to-one. And I think it's really, really important to help people into that space of those aren't just projects out there.
Right.
They're people, and they're people that are carrying this. I think this is another person's image. They've got a duffel bag full of problems that they're just walking around with them. Yeah. So get to know them, talk with them about what's in the duffel bag occasionally.
That's really good. I routinely tell, because my church has a lot of people that have suffered from spiritual abuse. It's just the way it would work, and I will often tell them that I don't think they should join up the programs in the church. If they want to, they're always welcome, but you know what? That's not a sign of healthy membership. that I'm not expecting that. And when people, because more and more survivors of Christian churches, abusive ones, simply don't go to the church anymore. When they do come and they say, their first concern, if they like your church, is that you're going to think they need to come every week. So I'll say, why don't you just work on coming on Communion Sunday? I'd love to see you. It'd be nice for you to take the sacraments with us, and we can touch base, and you can think through it for a few months, and maybe you want to check out some other churches too. We are totally cool with all of that. We'd love to see you, but maybe you should just come on once a month, since you basically used to get in trouble if you didn't go to church,
From a pastoral perspective, you identify someone through observation, or maybe they tell you, how have they been affected? What are the range? You touched on this in the first episode, but what are the range of areas that have been hurt through spiritual abuse? It's not merely that they've been lied to, but there's all sorts of things.
Yeah. I think it's the ability to trust not only the pastor. Sometimes they never even make it to talking to the pastor to give him a shot. It's the ability to form trusting, healthy relationships, because they have been in nothing but transactional relationships in the churches they were in. In other words, we stay friends because I keep coming to this church and I'm a supporter along with you. We all know that if I didn't come to church next week because I decided to go to another church, you and I would not be friends. So they've lived in that kind of a world, and it's worn down their abilities to be trusting of others, and also to a degree it's dulled their ability to love themselves. They have to learn what it is to appropriately love their fellow members of the church, and happens fast, but it has to happen.
Some other areas that you talk about, their marriages oftentimes, their parenting, their parenting, money, education, jobs, professions, all these kinds of things.
It's routine that if somebody was really dug deeply into one of these groups, that they have suffered economic loss. They might be going back to school for a second career that they wanted to go back to 10 or 15 years ago, but they have this parenthesis in their life. Their children and theirs relationship are difficult, especially if the children were born into that group, because the children know nothing except cult dad. And so with Sharon and I, our children, it took a while for them to kind of get to know who Ken and Sharon are when we're not being controlled by people. So those are some losses. And then the marriage losses are just... they're just devastating. If the spouses knew each other and were married before joining the cult, they will probably do okay leaving it. They have a pre-cult life. Sharon and I knew each other when we were just kids, so we went through a lot that probably would have broken up a lot of marriages, but we had a history, so we knew we were sticking together. We had a pre-cult life. But the people who meet in the cult, in the abusive church, I use both terms because that's what it is, but it is devastating for them to leave, if they leave together, because the only them they know is the cult them with a layer of cultic behavior and action, and they never really knew the real person. So it can happen that those marriages last, but it is very often that they simply can't withstand leaving that environment, and their marriage won't make it.
So it's not just a matter of, hey, we just need to correct some doctrine with these folks, and then everything will be okay.
That's what a lot of them think, but no, it's not that. Their views of marriage have been kind of whacked up.
Okay.
So you write late in the book, it's one of my favorite sentences, you say, over the years I've come to believe that Christians need great pastors, more than they need great preachers. Could you help us understand what you mean by that?
Sure. Before the age of electronic communication in the form of amplification, speaking to thousands of people, and radio and television and tapes and all that, before that, the church had to exist in smaller numbers. So a guy today, let's just say he's a very successful pastor in terms of his church size. Let's say he has 1,000 people in it. He fills the role that 15 pastors used to fill. Good shepherds. They used to take 15 of them. Now we got one. So there's a distancing between the pastors. So people don't get a distancing between the preacher and the people. So the people are not shepherded by their shepherd as much today. They are spoken to by a great preacher, but the greatest power of preaching, I believe, is in the smaller churches across America, because it is a person looking people in the eye that he has pastored that week. And he doesn't preach a message that in Portland that could be preached in Kansas City, or it could be preached in London. It could be preached anywhere. It's, don't steal or something like that. He's preaching to the 40 people in front of him, and he's saying, tax day comes up this week, and we have been talking about the fact that we haven't been straight up about it. So, what are we going to do, Grace Church, this week about this issue? So there's an ability for pastoring to take place within preaching in the smaller church, which is really beautiful. And that's what brought me around after I'd studied nothing but preaching. And I started out with my doctorate in preaching. I mean, it was my whole thing. And I was, 30 hours a week, whatever, just hammering out the language and all that. And I got to a place where I saw that the real power came only through the investment of relationships I had made with the people in that room. And it became okay for me to lose my place, to put away the notes, to speak with what I felt I was saying. I even, here's a first timer, I even had an anxiety attack last year while preaching and had to quit. And I'd never had one before, not like this. And it's a small church, and we had developed such a loving relationship that they had a pizza waiting for me when I got home. I mean, so that kind of transparency can only come about through pastoring, not through being a great preacher, I feel.
What is a safe shepherd then? Another thing you say is that safe churches are needed, and pastored by safe pastors. What is a safe shepherd?
Yeah, a safe shepherd simply never strikes the sheep. And I was in an interview once with a couple of pastors that I'm sure we know, and the subject kind of came up of at what point, how do you respond to the church plotting against you and movements within the church? And I gave a really bad answer, and I didn't make it onto the interview tape because I said, I can't think of a scenario as a shepherd where I would ever strike the sheep. I'm supposed to protect them. And I've been in the Middle East a few times in my life, and I've seen lots of shepherds. Everybody does if you're there. And I've never seen one haul off and smack a sheep or break its legs so it can learn to submit or something. So a safe shepherd, first and primarily, is one who views himself almost as an employee of the boss. His pay, his benefits, his package is given from the boss, from Jesus, the good shepherd. And his job is to never hit the sheep, to only do what needs to be done. So when we've ordained a couple of pastors through the years at Grace, we tell them in front of the church, with them kneeling, your job is to give up your life for this flock. It doesn't matter if it costs you money, health, anything. Your job is to die for this flock. Still want the job, you know?
Yeah.
So a safe shepherd is very sacrificial and very kind like that.
So follow up to that then, how might a pastor or ministry leader even, right? You don't
Sure.
have to be this lead pastor,
Right,
senior
right.
pastor. How can they effectively lead without crossing the line into abuse?
Yeah. Boy, that's a good question. It's a matter of conscience for the leader, first off. You have to know if you are going over a line or not and be honest about that. But I believe the way to effectively lead is to never require obedience. It's not my job to require obedience out of anybody.
Obedience to whom?
To me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. But even when I say that, requiring obedience to Jesus, what does that look like? Nobody's chasing me around requiring obedience. I would be a hurting puppy if somebody was making sure Ken Garrett was always obedient. So I feel that our leadership in the church crosses the line when it develops standards of behavior and assessment that tell us somebody is here, really doing the job and a good disciple. And start separating out the church like that.
Okay. And so you're not necessarily, so you're not saying that you wouldn't call people to obedience when it comes to things that are clearly taught in Scripture.
Yeah, I definitely, of course, call people to obedience. But my actions within the church are always designed to protect the body of the church, not to find a disobedient person and say, my vision for life is to have an obedient church. You're not obedient. You're causing me trouble.
Okay.
It's
good.
to
That's
identify the destructive nature of sin within a church, and then to say, I'm protecting a church here. We got to work on how I can do my job of protecting this flock.
Okay.
That's good. A few questions here at the end. I'd like to do these maybe in rapid fire form, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of pops up throughout both of these discussions with you is a question that maybe on the front end of some minds of those listening, is why didn't you just stop being a pastor? Given all that background, all the struggle, all what seems like just the breaking of things, why didn't you just give up?
Give up in my desire to be a pastor?
Yeah.
Because I had a genuine sense that it's what I had been called to do. Yeah, I was a paramedic for 23 years, and all my partners knew that that's what I was aiming for. It's what I wanted to do, and so I carried a lot of baggage into it, which probably led to a lot of oversharing with my church. I'm a pretty relaxed person because I do not want secret things to suddenly explode on me. So I'll let people know what I've been up to, and I hope I don't do it in a self-serving way, but because I want to remain being a pastor. That's
good. How does the gospel answer spiritual abuse?
How does the gospel answer spiritual abuse? Well, that's really good. And it strikes me that the only way it can answer spiritual abuse is if it strips itself of some of the additions we put on the gospel. I'm a believe in Jesus and you're saved, period, guy. And I know they cause all kinds of trouble all over, but that's me. So the way the gospel has helped me for that is I can begin with determining that in the life of a victim, and then starting from a standpoint of you are a believer in Jesus Christ. Now let's see how he will heal you. And that is the gospel to me, believing in Christ. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
That's good.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Like if we're looking to maybe formulate a way to serve those who have been hurt by spiritual abuse, are there resources? Are there places that you would point us?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, I'd like to point us to good pastors, who will freely refer their parishioners to therapists that can help them with this issue. So you would develop a pocket list of who's some go-to people that get it about spiritual abuse, and an informed pastor who won't just have his eyes roll back in his head and fall over when he hears about the financial and sexual and problems, but pastors who are prepared to deal with abused sheep and kind of be on that team. So I think where we go from it is to just gently talk about it enough that pastors get aware of the fact of, all right, there's this thing that happens in Christian churches, and we've dodged a bullet by not admitting it's a cult, by all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, now we're paying for it, so we need to acknowledge it.
Hey, Ken, thank you so much for taking so much of your time. Super helpful to think through these issues. We want to remind everyone to pick up Ken's book, In the House of Friends, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Abuse in Christian Churches. You can get that on Amazon. And then I think we'll be giving a few away as well. So look for that. Ken, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks for having me.